All right. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Data Accountability and Assessment Network at LACOE for first meeting of 2026. Sound check in the room because we have a little bit different microphone set up in Zoom. Can you hear me okay if I'm standing here? You guys can hear me. Or anybody online? Nobody complain. Okay. As long as I hover, I guess I can walk with the mic if I need to, but okay, excellent. All right. Well, first I want to introduce myself, Evan Bartelheim, Project Director for Accountability and Data Literacy. I'm joined to my left are my colleague, Dr. Hillary Weissman, my team. They're in the back of the room, and they're they're making things happen behind the scenes. I'm also joined by our amazing colleagues from the assessment unit, Stephen Bartlett and Sarah Nitzos, and they'll be up in a little bit. Today's going to be a fun day because we're actually having the extension activity that follows the morning online hybrid version. And then we actually are having a Wednesdays at 1 kickoff, which is the assessment unit's weekly meeting that happens during the assessment period. So we're doing a networking event. It's not a Wednesday, obviously, but we're doing a networking event, which is going to be fun after our extension activity. So for those of you who are online right now, mute your microphone. And also, if you're going to use a big meeting, just use the chat if you have questions, so we can always get back to you either in real time, or if not, when we have a documentation that we can follow up with our follow-up email that we can get responses from anywhere, including CDE. And if you're here in person, we have the mics at the table. Just raise your hand first, and then there's a little button on there. You turn on when the light turns green, then you could talk, and that will enable our questions to be heard by everybody who's in the Zoom room as well. So our purpose here, we want to make sure you have purposeful communication going forward. So we have some activities today specifically designed to help you communicate with people who need to hear it most at your districts. We have an inquiry-based mindset, right? Like we try to stay low, and I think there's a couple of items today that we'll talk about. I'm like, be open and receptive. Because some of these things, like always, that you get things thrown at you, you have your immediate visceral response to maybe this could be really negative, but in fact, it may not be. So you'll stay tuned. That's a teaser for the fun stuff to talk about. We do like to think of this as a think tank. We actually have an amazing group in the room today, so that's great. I'm glad to see more and more people coming out. And we do base this on trust. So we record this, and we certainly want everybody to share, but we also want to be able to speak openly about concerns we have. And so we do approach this with, we want to hear you. We want to make sure everybody is heard. And then we do see this as a shared responsibility to that. And we always try to leverage our internal capacity, our internal experts, to share with us what they're doing. And some of that will take place during our extension activity. It's just a little bit easier to facilitate those kinds of sharing in person. So that's why we encourage you to come out in person when you have the opportunity. We, of course, understand sometimes you just can't fit into your schedule, or the drive is horrendous. So our Canvas resources, as usual, are posted, and I think we will drop those in the chat if we haven't already. And we have a lot of links there. And then some of today's resources, I think, are a lot of resources for the assessment team that they're going to go over. All the information we have is current as of right now. Last week was a big week. We had a state board meeting 2 weeks ago. Then we had a number of meetings last week, including our RAN meeting, where we hear from the CDE, from the assessment and accountability folks. And then there's a CISC meeting where we heard further. So things are kind of fluid because there are actually a lot of changes taking place this year, and you're going to hear about them in a minute with regards to accountability. But as of right now, this is everything that's current. But yeah, please ask questions, and we will do a follow-up as always within about a week, and we'll have a recording of the event, and hopefully any questions that baffle us we'll get more clarity on. We have this is the last of 3 meetings for the year, but we have future meetings on March 17th and May 19th. So hopefully you can come out for one of those as well. Anyway, so let's kick it off with a quick what's your current weather and your weekly forecast for now. And I share this, I was talking to somebody in the room. I've got my twin daughters are on opposite coasts. So, one of them's having the experience on the left here, which is, a Boston winter. And the other is in Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And this is a California winter. And so, the whole range is possible. So, if you're in the room, turn to someone at your table and share what your current what your current weather is and what your forecast for the week is. And if you're in the chat, go ahead and drop something in the chat for us. All right, I think here's some stuff going on in the chat. Hillary, maybe you could give us a quick update. What's the weather feeling like for the folks in?
We do have quite a bit of people who are resonating with the picture on the right-hand side. However, there are a few that are noting that they woke up this morning and it's about 40 degrees, and they're looking forward to the California shift to the 71 later today. There is one person in here who said it was 20 degrees at their house though this morning. I'm sorry for you.
Somebody who lives in the mountains, apparently. How about in the room? Is anybody in the room having anything other than that? Make sure you use the mic. All right. Yeah. Well, it could be, I was saying, we're just looking at the couple weeks ahead. We feel some headwinds, I guess, in the sense of a lot of things coming up, and we really mentioned it, but we have our differentiated assistance convening coming up in a few weeks, and some of you may be joining us there. And there's a lot of prep that goes into that. So we're doing that. We have a CISC symposium, I think we mentioned last time, and there's a link to register for that if you haven't gone. But anyway, so it's going to be busy, but I think generally sunny, and we're pretty happy right now. So today's agenda, we're going to give you a lot of accountability updates. There's a lot of stuff going on. Some very brief CalPads and some data updates, some resources for you, and some upcoming professional learning opportunities, and turn over to the assessment unit after a little break. The assessment unit is going to give us a lot of assessment dates and some of their own professional learning opportunities. And then we're going to cut off the Zoom meeting, and we're going to go full in person for everybody who's here for an extension activity. And then, as I mentioned, and we didn't put it on here, then after the extension activity, then we have an extended activity for our Wednesdays at 1 network kickoff. So anybody who's in Wednesdays at 1 or regularly attends that can stick around, or don't stick around. You can come. We'll have basically an opportunity to get to know one another in person, which we always feel like being on Zoom is great, and it's certainly convenient, but it doesn't help you bond and network. And some of the real value to having this collaborative is getting to know some of the people, so you can pick up the phone and call them when you need them. So I'm handing it over right now to Hillary.
Good morning, everyone. Hillary Weissman from the Accountability and Data Literacy team. For those of you who I didn't say hello to, welcome. And for those of you in Zoom land, it's good to see you. Happy New Year. I still feel someone said it's appropriate to say that, so it still works that way. As Evan mentioned, there are some accountability updates that we are going to go through, especially the 2026 accountability work plan. We'll skip through some of these topics that you've probably heard before, just to remind you of some, update you. You're going to continue to hear those updates as the next few months go on, and the state board and the Department of Education make some decisions, and we'll be bringing you back that information. As we said before, if you've got questions in your room, feel free to raise a hand or use the mic in front of you. If you're on Zoom, or if you're in the room and you'd prefer, please drop that in the chat. And when I get through the updates, we will kind of go through questions as they came in order. And so to start us off, the items on the 2026 work plan, as you can see, there's about 9 or so that we're going to kind of jump through. Like I said, I'm not going to read them all to you, but as you can see, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of excitement around these possible outcomes. And it means that those next 6 months, you're going to be hearing lots of decisions that are being made, a lot of different thought and feedback that's going into the state board as they get back to us on these topics. And keeping in mind that this slide is summarizing the Assembly Bill 121, which requires a change to California's differentiated assistance system. And that law directs the State Board of Education to update the performance criteria used for differentiated assistance by July 15th, 2026. And since the indicators play a huge part in the eligibility criteria, you'll see the impact on this work plan for 2026 and how condensed and targeted the information is to get decisions made by that deadline. Excuse me, I got that cold that everyone said they had. Finally got it. With that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about student growth model, and hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the ELA and the math growth scores, the baseball card. in the information section of the dashboard. The card does look different, as we've mentioned before, from the 2024 version with updated performance language, now including minimal, moderate, average, accelerated, and exceptional, in addition to the full spectrum of performance colors that you've all seen. However, as I mentioned, you'll notice it's still in the information section only because it has that teal color band on top. This year's work plan is going to address potentially the state board considering adding ELA and math growth as full state indicators on the 2026 dashboard, which would require them to incorporate any related decisions into the revised criteria for state assistance. It's important to also keep in mind and remember that these data, as you know, don't drop at the same time that the dashboard does. It takes quite a bit of time to render this data, which makes it a challenge and interesting to see how that may play out for the release to LEAs in a timely fashion. So we'll keep you updated in the next few months on what that's going to be looking like. Moving along to science, kind of in the same vein as student growth model, as the State Board of Education is going to consider that as well as a full state indicator, which would also include it in the support determinations criteria. So they'll be reviewing that. And as I mentioned before, just like the growth model, it resides in the information section with that teal band on top. But as we know, it has been exciting for people to talk about. We have enjoyed a lot of robust conversation with districts in LA County about what that looks like. And so we anticipate that the state board, they're going to continue to review differentiated assistance updates and criteria, probably run some simulations on what it would look like to incorporate science. And like we said, we expect a full, comprehensive share out later by July. Let's talk about the college career indicators, probably one of everyone's favorite, at least it's ours up here. And it has had extensive discussion around it. It is complex and ever evolving, especially if you're in that high school arena or a unified school district and deal with it. About 2 weeks ago, the state board held a study session to provide a really holistic view of the CCNI, including goals for the indicator, current measures, and the future path with new measures to the indicator, as you can see up here on this slide. And over the next few months, the Department of Education will provide an analysis on potential courses and exams for both International Baccalaureate Program and for the Cambridge International Program for inclusion to the CCI. Also, they'll be considering options for the inclusion of the State Seal of Civic Engagement to be discussed. There's a second part to that college career indicator is for the new career measures to be potentially included in the CCNI. And the state board's going to review, they said, over the past 5 years, the data that they have collected, the data that the Department of Education has collected around internships, student-led enterprise, simulated work-based learning, and the ASVAB. So the state board said they're going to be looking at that, as well as they've indicated interest in examining how other career measures such as apprenticeships and supporting students with extensive support needs might be addressed in the CCNI. So as you can see, even though we're like about 4 slides in, that the state board has quite a few decisions on the horizon. With that being said, for the application-based dashboard alternative school status, which we will call the DAAS, only a few schools really are affected, but the goal here is to reduce the burden on the schools for them providing the data, and instead of them providing data that demonstrates their eligibility, having the Department of Education really leverage existing CALPADS data. And the remaining work plan for the 2026 plan is focused on collecting data for credit deficient students, which might use students who were previously enrolled in a high school in CALPADS. So expect some more information around that and some clarity as we learn more of that, probably in March. As we move to priority 1, teacher assignment data, work on this, as we know, began in 2025 and it's going to continue to 2026. There's a need, it's been articulated, to provide clarity on the terminology used for teacher data across the dashboard, the school accountability report card, and the teacher assignment monitoring data, so that the terms are consistent and easy to understand for the public. They're much more aligned. what we'll notice is that the state board, they're also going to be considering showing this intra-district comparison data on the dashboard. And there's currently a link. And if you're a medium or a larger size district, and you look at that link, you know, especially if it's like your LAUSD, it can be very extensive and it can be cumbersome on your webpage, but that too is up for discussion. And as decisions are made and as educational partners provide feedback, we will then provide you updates on what that would look like as well. Okay, so moving on to our 14th student group, the long-term English learners. And I would have to say that the long-term English learners over this past year have been an awesome conversation. That's the word I can tap into today. Not just with colleagues here, but at the state level, at the county level, and when we've worked with districts this year. And so that's been really nice to see. There are just a few things left to do with the LTEL group, which include considering the modifications for the LTEL students in the suspension rate indicator, as you know. The suspension rate indicator has multiple 5x5s, including elementary schools and elementary districts. And we know that you can't be eligible to be in this student group until around 6th grade. And because of this, the distribution of LTELs looks different in an elementary school and elementary district with a concentration or a cluster of LTELs towards the higher grades, calling into question the accuracy of the 5x5s for this student group. So we're going to see how this plays out and how the state board is going to be addressing this need. And we'll look further into this modification, so stay tuned for more of our LTELs. Oh, hang on. They included recently reclassified students, the RFEPs on the LP. Don't let me forget about that. The augment to the LP calculation, as you can see here, what we know is that could provide a bump in LP scores. And this is another one of those things, as we'll stay tuned as we see how that kind of develops. And then an update here, request to language update. So moving forward with the modifications on the academic indicator language and information used on the dashboard, there was a response to the word previously used as standard. And the Department of Education, if you haven't already seen it, they went ahead and they updated the 2025 dashboard items related and related resources. So the descriptions that were previously used, meeting grade level standards, have been updated to reflect meeting proficiency standards. Things like standard met's been updated to level 3 proficient. So this is, I like to think, is a really good example of how accountability and assessment are kind of working together to align their language, and now it's visible on the dashboard. Try to put in a little small picture there, as you can see.
I'll just add to that, excuse me. I think this is kind of just to confirm the achievement level descriptors are changing this year as well, right? And so to be consistent, and we've shown that graphic where you've got level 2 is grade level, and there's that, conversation, what is grade level, right? And we used to say, oh, level 3, that's grade level. But realistically, no, if a student is demonstrating, if they're level 2, they're demonstrating some proficiency at the grade level content because of the tests they're taking. So this is just trying to change this to be consistent with that language. And there's some additional things. It came up kind of like in a late, board item. So it's a little bit kind of out of left field, but I think it's consistent with what they're already talking about.
Some of the other things that are included in that modification, the academic indicator, is that it shows student performance trends at all 4 levels with a link to each LEA and school's CASP page, updating the terminology to use distance from proficiency standard instead of distance from standard, and the exploration of a clear positive point scale for the 2027 dashboard. And I'm wondering how much of science might have pushed that. However, the state board they will evaluate it, look into it. If need be, they'll look into potential updates for the California ESSA state plan. So stay tuned on what that may look like. There's the update there. The update to the dashboard schedule itself, as you can tell, and then we're familiar with State Board 114, and that moved up those publication dates. And for the past 3 years, we've had those dates creeping closer and closer to that October 15th date. So know that this year, the dashboard will drop on October 15th, 2026, at the same time that the CASP data will drop. So it is like a data overload. In a great way, it will be raining data. And this is, it's a full month in advance. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to make this happen. So we're going to see this big lift. And excuse me, as you're planning for that 2026 release, remember there's those two accountability releases. That first one is going to be the dashboard and the LCFF differentiated assistance files. Keep in mind that that private preview will probably be limited to 1 day prior to that release, and we'll keep you updated if anything changes. And then as usual, we have that accountability, that second release. So those are those supplemental items. That's that dashboard additional reports that we all love, growth data and data files, federal determination school accountability report card files, and the dashboard alternative school status 1-year graduation rate. Are there questions we have here? Are there questions in the room?
And no questions in the chat. Questions in the room? Use the mic.
Do you mind using the microphone? But
Okay, so the question, just for the Zoom people, that's what they care, this is, does the LP already include reclassified students, or will it be moving forward? So got to go take a little history lesson. The initial LP did include recently reclassified, like reclassified within that year. But then the U.S. Department of Education rejected that. There was actually, the state had it in their ESSA plan, and they had to appeal it when the state or the feds rejected it. And they said, no, you can't have that. That doesn't fit our rules. So they had to remove that, and they reconstituted the LP differently. So now they're talking about doing this, but only for LTELs. And it's an important distinction. LTELs themselves are not in the ESSA plan. It's this 14 student group that only exists for state accountability, not for federal accountability. So for determinations like CSI, ATSI, TSI, LTELs don't exist because they haven't been written, and the state is probably reluctant, understandably so, to reopen the ESSA plan right now because it could, result in all sorts of changes that we wouldn't like. So they are only going to change this for LTELs. They're the only group they could change it for. And what the consideration will be, we'll add those. So a student, if you had an LTEL who was reclassified, even like in April, so you did not end up giving that student the summative LPAC, that student would count, they'd be added to your denominator and your numerator in the calculation. So it's only upside. So, you don't get penalized because that student presumably would have been at a level 4 in order to be reclassified. And then they likely would have received a level 4 again and they'd taken the test. So the assumption is that would be a positive outcome for you. And so you don't want people gaming the system by keeping, resisting reclassifying when they're eligible. So this is kind of an acknowledgement of that. Yeah, it's only for LTELs. English learners would not, and that's kind of the important. The question is, it's only for LTELs. That reclassification, if a student was an LTEL, it'll only appear on the LTEL calculation. But of course, LTELs are a subcomponent of ELs. It won't count in the EL calculation, so they're going to have to kind of split and divide. So if it's an LTEL, for the LTEL calculation, it'll be included. But if it was an LTEL reclassified, it won't be added to the EL calculation.
we have another question. Yes, turn it on. Push the button. There you go.
So how long is accountability release 2? How long after the first release will that be released?
Well, yeah, this year it took a month. Everything came like a month later. So that I would expect about approximately the same thing. The big one, the growth data, which is calculated by ETS, they have a separate contract for that. That just takes a lot of compute power. So because it's a lot, they're matching student scores and looking, running a lot of, it's a big model. So that takes a while. The other thing, the federal support determination, the additional reports, that's kind of like standing up that information. So they just wanted to, make sure people know it's not going to happen instantaneously. But this year was pretty quick. We had it before, we went to break for all those pieces.
We do have a question in the chat. Do we know when the data is pulled for dashboard updates? This person in particular, I asked because I work at a year-round school, so we reclassify starting in July each year because the year starts July 1st.
So for the purposes of for accountability purposes, that July 1 is the start of a new school year. So if those students are reclassified during the summer, they would count, they would be, well, actually, that's a good question because they didn't have I guess if they had enrollment within that year, that would be the key. So if you did not have enrollment, if you're year-round school, presumably you have enrollment for those students during that summer. But if you did not, then they wouldn't have shown enrollment. They would have been, we'll follow up with that question. We'll get some clarity as to what would constitute within the year. And I think that's relevant to other folks. So I know sometimes all the data doesn't come in, and there's been guidance in the past about reclassifying during the summer as well. So this will be we'll get clarification for everybody, even if you're not a year-round school.
And then one more. Is accountability release number 2 also on October 15th?
No,
It's not.
that'll be like we were just saying, a few weeks later, probably mid-November would be consistent with what the last 2 years have been. It takes about a month to calculate all the other things.
The chat looks clear. Questions here look clear. Come talk to us about grace periods.
All right. So this was also in the accountability work plan, but it's worth separating out because it's so relevant. This is one of those areas where accountability and assessment really they're so intertwined. So the participation rate, as all of you probably know, is kind of a critical feature of determination for the academic indicators. And one aspect of that for a long time has been the determination of grace periods, right? If there's a student who either enters your district or your school late or leaves or departs early, there is this grace period within the window, and there's rules surrounding that. And so what's being proposed, and actually I think it could safely say it's beyond proposed at this point, the state board doesn't have to vote on this. They will be updated by the CDE because this really falls into the business rules. It doesn't have to be board approved, but they're looking to eliminate the grace periods for the academic, both smart and balanced ELA and math, and the California science test, and also the alternate assessments for all of those. So, people are I think the initial implication is, oh no, the grace periods, this is really important. And so the state board took a lot of time to share with the CDE shared with the state board a lot of data that really shows the implications are not that dire. It doesn't really affect many schools, and schools are going to be the ones who are most subject, I guess, to the implications of this because they're smaller, right? If you get to a district size, generally, not meeting the participation rate is less likely to happen. And if you don't, it's going to have, the numbers are great enough that it doesn't really swing things having a loss assigned. But so we're going to talk about how they came to this determination, what the implications are, and then actually our extension activity today is going to be how to make sure that we've got some strategies moving forward, because it's not without no implications, and there may be some things unique to this year, just like we had the COVID year. There may be some external elements that could impact your testing that you need to start thinking about. So just going backwards, the dashboard incorporated the participation rate of 95%. That's a federal requirement, and it's a state level. So, but it trickles down to individual schools and student groups. Everyone has to meet that 95% participation rate. And that's the students who are enrolled and the students who then are expected to test. Then subsequently, the academic indicator uses those other rules, like were they enrolled on census day, that again, the continuous enrollment. But as far as participation rate, that's just calculated by the students who are enrolled, who's expected to test, and you're expected to test 95% of all students. Let me clarify. You're expected to test 100% of all students. But if you fail to test 95%, then there are implications in the form of the assignment of a lowest obtainable scale score or a loss. In other words, a penalty to make it sting a little bit more, right? And so that the loss for ELA and math and the loss for science, they're calculated somewhat differently, but everybody feels them. So the idea was, and you have to kind of go back in time, and it is crazy to think back on this. I was in Santa Monica, Malibu when we started this assessment. It's like goodbye star testing. All right, we're moving into this new assessment, and you didn't have the technology, right? So you had to have these gigantic windows. I mean, literally, we were driving laptop carts between schools to facilitate. And and we hadn't really thought out, well, is there a strategic way to set up our assessment windows? Basically, you just open it the first available day, and you kept it open till the last available day. And of course, within that big window, you could have a lot of movement. You could have students, like I said, students who left right as the window opened, and you're like, they left the state, or students who came in the last 2 weeks. And so the assessment windows were a response to that, like the challenges that we faced in assessing people because we just didn't have the technology. And of course, COVID made the technology and changes in technology, I guess, but the infrastructure became a lot better over the last few years. And it's not necessarily a given that everybody's got a one-to-one Chromebook or laptop ratio, but it's definitely a lot better. Some people still do have carts, but it's, not like it had been. So, they were looking at it, it's like, what is the real impact? How many students are even falling within these grace periods? How many students, and what would be the impact if we remove them? Because quite frankly, it would just be a lot more straightforward if we just said, just assess everybody, let's not play games. And one of the things that they were hearing, the state CDE was getting a little alarmed the last 3 years. They're getting questions from the field that sounded like people were trying to figure out, when can I exit this student so that they fall within the grace period? And they were like, there are a few things that were sounding pretty fishy. And so they thought people may be gaming this. And we want to avoid that. We want to avoid anything that looks fishy. And generally speaking, everything's, they've seen that the window shrunk significantly. So here's the diagram of what it looks like. So if you have a larger window, you get that the start and end dates. You have that. If it's very short, you only have the end period. Like, so a student who shows up in the end of the testing window, that you wouldn't be held accountable for testing that student if they showed up at the end, because it's a fairly short window, but still long enough. And then accountability testing window, when the start and end date is more than 31 calendar days, you get the grace period at the beginning and in the end to catch both ends, right? So that's what they're talking about, eliminating those grace periods dependent on then. So like I said, everybody's reminded every year you're supposed to test 100% of your students. Of course, there are all sorts of factors out of our control, parent opt-outs, kids getting sick. Those are somewhat different, obviously, but than the grace period. But we do also have a lot of kids, who move around. That's just the reality too. So we allowed that grace by leaning into these dashboard rules. Like I said, this is something that's really a dashboard business rule. It's not like a state mandated. The only thing we were looking in the ed code is, at a minimum, it's 25 school days that the window, that's the smallest window you could have. That's in ed code, and that's related more to CASP administration. And then the ratio is your students tested, and they'll take out any of the students who have a medical emergency, but not kids who parents opt out, or kids who just miss, or kids who open the test but don't complete it. There's some factors in there. And then divided by the number of students enrolled, that determines your participation rate, both at the student group level and overall. So, like I said, they've been concerned by this increase in emails that seem a little bit suspicious. So what'll happen? They remove the grace period, and some of those students will be added back into the calculations. That's just, you're going to have students who are added back in to the denominator and not to the numerator, right? And so that's going to potentially increase your number of students who are assigned the lowest obtainable scale score, which particularly for ELA math has significant consequences because it's a minus 300, right? And so if you have a small group, it could be significant. So what they looked at is, they modeled this last year's data, 24, 25, and they said who it affected. Approximately 2,000 to 3,000 students would have been added back in, but that's distributed across a lot of schools. And for science, this was actually kind of compelling. It's only 3 grades. That's part of it too. You're only assessing science in 3 grades with a grade span of high school. Only 500 students would have been added back in. So that gets pretty diffuse when you start looking at all the schools in the state. And what they found was the length of the testing window remained kind of similar. So the average testing window is 73 days. And those are calendar days, not just school days. But the grace period, removing the grace period, did not have a significant impact on the participation rate anywhere, right? So 94% of schools had the same participation rate. 5% of schools dropped 1 percentage point, which generally left them still above the 95% threshold. And 99% of schools that met the 95% requirement with grace periods applied still met that requirement once they were removed. So overall, not a big impact. So it's like, where are those schools on the margin where the student groups where it would have had an effect? And so they modeled some stuff. And I actually say, I didn't put all the data in the front, but in the PowerPoint at the very back, there's a little appendix that includes all the data, and you can look at it. And one thing that really caught me off guard by this, I was like, explain how this happens, right? So the next slide. So this is an example of how school performance levels changed from red. So if you had a red, and now you've got the participation rate changes because you've removed those the grace periods. What happens? And you see 4 schools change from red to orange in ELA, and I was like, like that to me is like, what? How did that? Makes no sense. However, keep in mind that they go back and apply the rules to the prior business year as well, right? And so if you remove the participation rate the year before, they're not going to change your dashboard to reflect that, but they change the calculation. So you might have had more losses assigned in the prior year because your participation rate was worse, and now you've got fewer. So actually, in your DFS, distance from standard, stays approximately the same. You'll actually see a positive change, right? Because you're digging yourself out of the hole by improving your participation rate somewhat, and that accounts for how it could improve, right? And so that kind of threw me that a lot of the numbers showed improvement from the prior year, because once you calculate in, if you're at a school or a student group level where you do have a lot of the students who are in and out, it could be that your prior year's performance was worse, and by improving it even slightly, you actually have a better outcome overall. So one school changed from red to orange in math, and all schools that were red on science remain red, right? And so here's an example of that. You can see this is an elementary school, and you can see by removing the grace periods that 2 students were added back in. But in this case, the 2 students added back in to the denominator because the prior year's participation rate was made worse, and their DFS was worse the prior year. So they had a minus 3.5 in the prior year. But the change was positive, even adding those students back in, because they had an improved participation rate, or I guess their participation rate remains largely the same. They end up with a better outcome. So that can account for these kind of weird discrepancies. And I encourage you to look. You can see the shifts at school level. And we have ELA, math, and science in the addendum, and you can see a grid where you can see if they were red, what happened. A lot of them stay red, but you see some improve. They're orange, some go up, some go down, but you see a lot of improvement among the schools because they are applying it both the prior year. And so overall, the summary, 20 have negative color changes. 5 of those are DAS schools, right? So this is an ELA statewide. So out of the 1,000+ schools statewide, you're not seeing a huge impact, but you have 6 who have the positive color change. Math, only 10 with the negative color change, 2 have positive. And then science with the 4 that have the negative color change, and 1 has positive color. But generally, everybody stays the same color. That's what they're trying to get in part, is like most of the time, it's not having a big impact whatever color you were. And the significance there is just for determinations, right? For eligibility, because this does affect ESSA, right? So they can change this without affecting the CSI, ATSI, TSI eligibility. And so you could have negative implications. Nobody wants to be, caught up in CSI for this reason, but it seems very unlikely to happen. And so they also applied this at the student group level, because then you get into really small groups. Again, student groups met 95% participation rate with grace periods, generally still met the participation rate without them. And between 98 and 98% of accountable student groups continue to earn the same performance level or color once they remove the grace periods. So, and I have one tool, our Roy, who greeted you out front. We just took the last 2 years. So within the ELA and math tables, or the downloadable data files, you've got the participation rate. So we just created an easy spreadsheet that you can filter. It's got both a school level. Hey, there's Roy. Thanks, Roy. Yay, Roy. So you can actually check the last 2 years, click on your school district, or we also have a school/charter school. If you're a charter school, you can look on the authorizing LEA, but that tool's on Canvas. And it just gives you at a glance, because yeah, you can get that data also from the additional reports page, but it's just will be here in one place, and you can see, were we close? You know, it's not like you walk around with a running record of how many schools or student groups were in the below 95%, but you can at least see what the numbers were like and where you might have some hot spots or concerns. And with that, I'm going to go through a couple, any questions? I'm going to pause for a second.
We do have a question here in the chat from Beth. In the grace period at the end, they are removing students that didn't test based on enrollment dates?
Yeah, so they remove the students if they enrolled in your district. Again, these students wouldn't end up being part of the distance from standard calculation. They only are in the participation rate calculation. So if a student enrolls in your district with 2 weeks that remain, and you have the big enough window that would include a grace period, then you wouldn't be held accountable within the participation rate for those students, and now you would be. So they show up at the end of the term. The expectation now will be you want to try to assess them. So if you don't, they could be, they would be added to your denominator, whereas before they wouldn't, and not added to your numerator if you didn't test them. Okay. Any questions in the room? Could you, use the mic.
I just wanted to ask, when do you expect this to be effective?
That is a great question. I didn't mention that. That is for this year. So the 2026 administration for ELA math and science, this will be applied. They're going to return to the board in March for an update. So, arguably it's a done deal, right? So just accept, I think that's where I think be open. And I think seeing the numbers, I was like thrown initially. I'm like, this could have nothing but negative consequences, but then kind of surprised. Oh, actually, I can see now. I understand once you add the prior year back in, but that's pretty much going to happen. With one added benefit, I guess, would be that adds time, right? The calculation of grace periods, the application of grace periods, and now as we move the publication date forward, it gets harder and harder to do all these things. So that additional data that comes out, including the growth data, because those grace periods also apply to those students that are excluded, right? So this could be one slight improvement in speeding things up to get the data out sooner. All right. So just some brief data updates. A couple things came out since our last DAAN meeting. Similar, so we got the DAS 1-year graduation rate and came out on the additional reports. The 2025 growth data, Hillary mentioned that earlier, being considered for full inclusion within our accountability status. And there's a downloadable data file. We actually wanted to talk about that this meeting, but we're pushing it because there's a webinar coming up and there's more stuff to do, I think. So we push that till our next meeting and talk about growth again. And the downloadable data file actually makes things a little more interesting. And then the ESSA eligibility file, which this year was, did you exit CSI or ATSI, or were you eligible for TSI? We're in the middle of the 3-year cycle. This is the last time that TSI is identified. Next round will be CSI, ATSI year again. And then the student level data file. So this is only schools or districts that charter schools or districts that serve high school students would have received this. And it's a file of student level. It's kind of for post-mortem, right? And I'm going to talk about it a little in here in a minute, because I did get some questions like, how do I use this thing? But as of last week, only about a third of the LEAs in the state that are eligible had downloaded this. And so that became available on January 7th. And it's only available through January 30th. So I'm making the case, download it, whether you know what to do with it or not, if you received it. And then finally, the charter school performance category data file came out also on January 7th. And that's that determination based on the dashboard, the different performance levels, which are used in renewal verification. So the CCI student level data and SOARs. And if you don't have high school students, tune out for the next couple of minutes. But the whole point of this tool is it was sent out to dashboard coordinators. That's the first thing to know. Who received this? If you're the authorized dashboard coordinator, you would have received this notification. If you don't know who your district's dashboard coordinator is, shoot me an email, because we have a list and we're getting an updated list. We know who all the dashboard coordinators are throughout the state. And if you don't have a dashboard coordinator, your superintendent or charter school administrator is the de facto person who can get everything. So In some instances, people may have not signed up for the dashboard coordinator. You have to be added each year. But you're the one, the dashboard coordinators would have access to this. There's a password gets sent out. It reflects as the students have completed each measure, and you get the SSID, and you can see if they were eligible for multiple measures, you see each one. And if they were prepared by multiple measures, you see which one. And if they were approaching prepared, you see which ones. But then the real killer part is that they also show all the things that they accomplished in addition to that, all the CCI measures. And so that's where you can start to shore up, like, what went wrong, with the kids who are either approaching prepared or not prepared, and they may have done something that could have been leveraged to get them to the prepared level, and we don't always know what that is. The data also includes demographic data. This isn't intended to be shared with the students' families. It's really intended for your own purposes to review your systems, and I think it's pretty cool. I didn't, I got a question actually. Dylan, who's here in the room, said, "Hey, how should I use this?" I'm like, you know what? Let me take a look at LACOE's, and we're unique. We don't have as many options as some districts have because of the nature of our schools, but I did play around with it. So the purpose is really to do some student information system validation, stuff that we think we're putting in, where people go, often with the college career indicator, this doesn't make sense. I thought this student was a CTE completer. I have more CTE completers. Why don't we see as many? This will tell you exactly how many you had. And because the demographic information is in there, it's also kind of nice because you can sort it pretty quickly to see, okay, is this adding up? Or are we something wrong with the way we're reporting things? And you can figure out, for example, big trends like, okay, there's like A through G completion by itself only results in approaching prepared. If I want to get kids prepared, I can start figuring out what are the most common ways to get the plus, right? Did they complete a CTE pathway? Did they take a college credit course? Did they take AP exam with 3 or higher? Or do they enroll in AP course? So it can give you the kind of the details to dig into, and you can just do kind of an audit and figure out what was going on. Again, only available till January 30th. So if you can figure out who your dashboard coordinator is, just download it and figure out what you can do with it. Question? The growth data, yeah. I've got a slide in like 2 minutes for the growth data webinar. But yeah, so for this, make sure you get the data. And let me just show you, basically, we just took it as a big spreadsheet and we're like, okay, what can we do with it? And we just, you can turn it into a pivot table, right? And so we just turned it into a pivot table. It's got limits, right? So you kind of have to focus on one measure. But in this instance, I looked at our students who were in the, they're either not prepared or approaching prepared. And I was curious because I saw a lot of counts in the course, the trimester college credit courses. And I'm like, if a student takes 3 trimester courses, they're prepared, right? And so I wanted to see, and this aren't huge numbers, but we had a number of students who were in the approaching prepared category because they took 2 trimester long college credit courses, 1 more trimester, and they would have been prepared, right? And so you can then double click in that pivot table and it'll show you the, in this case, the 4 students. And when I looked at the demographics, I'm like, wow, if some of these kids, they fit. We had one who was an English learner, also an LTEL, also socioeconomically disadvantaged. And you go, man, if that kid taken 1 more course, they would have been prepared, and there's a positive benefit to all those individual student groups. So that's my recommendation. Get it downloaded, find your pivot table whiz, and take a look at it and play with that data. And you might see some patterns emerge where you're like, there's some low-hanging fruit that we could, take advantage of to make sure these kids are getting that one extra thing that they need to push them in the prepared level. Finally, a couple things on CalPADS. So we're in the Fall 2 submission window. There's no amendment. So if you're supporting your CalPADS staff in terms of getting the certification for Fall 2 done, just know that there's no amendment window and everything has to be in by February 27th. This is a pretty big one. Maybe it doesn't impact the dashboard a lot, but just as far as what's important, the English Learner Services, we've got our friends from the Moss unit here, right? So this is, what your English Learner Services are being provided. So hopefully you got your CalPADS person has a speed dial to your EL coordinator and any EL staff to make sure that we have everything marked properly in CalPADS for what English Learner Services they're receiving. And then the big one is the teacher assignment and course data that gets put in at this time. And this goes into assignment monitoring, which eventually shows up on the dashboard and on your SARC in the teacher assignment monitoring outcomes, the TAMO data. And so this is a good one to have curriculum and instruction people involved with, Of course, your HR and credentials analyst, but those are the people who need to be looking at this data. And then any CTE, there's also this administration of this post-secondary status outcome for the students who completed a CTE pathway and graduated or left school. You need to do a follow-up survey and report this data during fall 2. Finally, related to CalPads, earlier this year, and we didn't really promote this because we had too tiny of a room, but CSIS, who does all the technical support for CalPads statewide, is having this Data Governance Academy. And we had a watch party, right? They're presenting from, they'd already established their in-person locales, but they'll allow you to do a watch party where a local person facilitates it. And they also, as part of this Data Governance Academy, they're having a virtual check-in. And so they're going to have a couple of districts. If you want to join the virtual check-in, they talk about what it means for a district to have good data governance, and some of the districts are already on this journey. We at LACOE have we have 2 data governance officers, because there's security, but there's also just facilitating the use of data and making sure everything's accessible and understandable. So it's a big process, but you might want to check that out. Or if you want to join our in-person watch party, we got a bigger room this time. This is really designed for kind of a team to come. If you're just like the CalPads person, don't have much leverage, might not be helpful. But if you're the accountability person, maybe you oversee CalPads, maybe you can bring someone with you to hear this, because that's probably ideal, is to have a team come and join. But they both build on that October meeting, so you won't be lost if you missed out on that. So we encourage you to join us, and there's a link for that in the thing. And then this is what I was talking about. There's a growth model webinar on February 2nd. It's at 10 o'clock. You can register for the CDE. We'll do follow-up on this as well, but it's really an explainer of the growth model. Again, it's potentially ends up in accountability, and so people really probably want to understand it better and how it's calculated. It's pretty complex, but from the people I've talked to, including a guy, psychometrician, who's very involved with the development of this model, it's one of the most accurate measures of what's actually going on, even more so than the calculation of distance from standard. So they actually have a link to submit questions beforehand. So if you have anything, please explain this. And the downloadable data files might be something you're interested in as well. And finally, I'm going to plug our own. This is shameless self-promotion here. We started this back in November. Hillary and I do this navigating data. It's designed for school level leaders. It started, but we always, we make our individual presentations somewhat standalone. And this is moving forward. There's 3 more sessions that are all virtual. So if you're interested, if you have a principal or a site leader who might benefit from this, we do talk about how to use your data to inform your SIPSA or to inform the work you're doing with teachers, to really, how do you build a continuous improvement model in your school? So this is something that we'd love to see more people online. I'm looking out. Nobody on Zoom knows this. There's cross street is a Kaiser, and there's a giant not protest march, but a strike going on of the nurses and other healthcare workers. And so there's now a big marching cohort going down the street. I just want to plug before we go to break here for 5 minutes. If you're going to leave us now because you don't care about assessment, you just love accountability. I know you're out there. I know you're my people. Make sure you fill out our survey form before you leave, and just assume the assessment stuff is going to be top notch and give them a 5. But otherwise, we're going to take a 5-minute break in the room and online, and we will be back at, what is it? Yes, 10 o'clock straight up.
There we go. All right. So step 1, welcome. So excited to have you guys here. As Stephen said, my name is Sarah Nitsos. We are going to talk quickly about all of the things you need to know for the coming months, because things are going to get rapidly accelerating and you need to have all the latest information. So step 1 is technology readiness, especially for those Chromebooks. You need to make sure that your IT team is on top of all of the latest updates. The link is there of exactly what needs to be done to make sure that you have the latest operating systems and secure browsers downloaded. So when you get back to your site, nice quick email to your IT team. Let's talk about reclassification and testing. If you're in the room, Devin is here and she would be a wonderful resource for this. But it's really important to look at where we have been and where we are. And we are looking at total students eligible to be reclassified. And as of January 5th, there were 6,664 students still eligible to be reclassified. Why is that number important? Well, because it's important that you look at those students before you start testing. If you have a student who scored a 4 and you're thinking, you know what, this might be a good child to reclassify, put them on a list and don't test them. Because if you do, you will then have to complete about 500 million stairs cases. I'm over exaggerating, obviously. However, you do have to complete a stairs case for every single domain. So it's important that if you are reclassifying students during the testing window, that you maybe pump the brakes on using the summative LPAC for them until that determination is made, unless you're at the end of the window. So it's important that you know who your students on that path to reclassification are, and you get them reclassified before they start testing. All right, it's almost party time. February 2nd, the window for summative LPAC and alternative summative LPAC opens. I know you're so excited, just like me. It opens February 2nd, but hear me and hear me well. It closes Friday, May 29th. But Sarah, no, it's the 31st. Yes, the 31st is the end of the window. However, that's a Sunday. So if you need to submit a stairs case or you need to call a success agent over the weekend, they will not be there to help you or to process that stairs case. And then the window will close. So it might just be a good idea to mark on your calendars that it closes that Friday, the 29th. Devin, go ahead. Yep, mic yourself up, man.
I just want to add that from experience, we'd also highly recommend that you don't start testing on Monday, February 2nd, because there's always glitches. Wait, like just a couple days. I heard Rachel saying they were starting the 5th. Perfect, right? Let other LEAs experience the glitches and then we'll learn from them, and then testing will be smooth for you.
Devin said exactly what I was going to say. In my district, we started the next week just because historically there have been glitches. However, this year, they do not have that downtime the weekend before it starts. So that's going to be definitely helpful for all of us. But heed the wisdom. We have form assignments and second scoring and testing time. Oh my. It's important that you know which form you have been assigned. I put both of the links for the lookup tools here, easy for you to recognize, easy for you to get to. If you are a district that has been selected for second scoring, it's important that you know which schools have been selected for second scoring so you can account for that. Estimated testing times. Now, as we know, kids have unlimited time. Well, not unlimited, the 29th, but we want to make sure that they have the time they need, but you have to create a plan. You have to create a schedule. So you kind of want to get an idea of what that estimated testing time is. The goal of this slide and the next few slides was to take all of the links related to LPAC and bring them into one place for you. So they're on the slides, they're on the agenda, just to make sure you have easy one-click access to everything. Because this looks like a lot, but I'm gonna go through it really fast because the DFAs opened January 20th. They are now available for you, but notice the red padlock, they are secure. You need to keep those materials secure. I'm sure you already know that. But the DFAs opened on the 20th, they're ready for you to download. The picture cards, if you are doing the alternative LPAC and you have students that require the use of those picture cards, you can download them or you can order them and the state will send them to you on beautiful cardstock. They're very nicely done. But that order needs to be completed through the AST. I forgot where that link was. Don't worry, it's right there. The online testing administration materials, or the OTAM. Those are the links. Those have a green padlock. They are open. They definitely need to be kept in a safe location, but they're not secure. The resource guides and planning, also not secure. The PFAs for all of the assessments, as well as how to start an LPAC, that one pager that's really helpful for people who are doing it for the first time. So all of the links that you might possibly need all in one place, ready to go. It's important. I know it, maybe we're a little cart before the horse, or cart behind the horse at this point. It's important that we're really looking at our accessibility resources. I just spoke to a district yesterday and they were checking. I was bravo for them for checking. And they noticed that several of their students who were duly identified did not have their accommodations or designated supports uploaded into the system. They haven't had an annual IEP just yet. So that new information hadn't been loaded. So double check that your students who need these accessibility resources, that they have been uploaded. Make sure the people who are giving the assessment have gone through the universal tools that are accessible to the students. I remember when I was at the site, I'd go over and go, hey, I noticed you're not using the line reader. That was definitely something we talked about. They're like, I don't know how to make it start. It's important that our students know where these tools are and how to find them. All right, let's talk about some summative LPAC testing reminders and FAQs. These are gathered from emails I've received. I can't launch the LPAC on my computer. It's not working. What's going on? You have to sign your Tom's affidavit. If your Tom's affidavit is not signed, you cannot launch a testing session. He agrees. That is a nice horn honking out there. He completely agrees. It can take 45 to 60 minutes for that security affidavit to process in the system. So it's important they don't have a class full of students in front of them all waiting to log in. It could go faster, but bank on 45 to 60. I did Moodle last year. Do I have to do it again? Yes, you do. Raise your hand if you've heard that. Yes, there's lots of hands in the room if you can't see them. So you do need to go into the AST site, get your key, then go into the Moodle site, enter that key, and then complete the Moodle training. Now, December 5th was the deadline for everyone to complete the LEA coordinator LPAC training, and I'm seeing nods around the room, so I'm just assuming that all of us are good to go on that because you've been to our trainings, and that it's all open, ready to go. But what about the alternative summative LPAC? If you currently do not have any students identified to take the alternative summative LPAC, then you do not need to complete the alternative summative LEA coordinator training. Whew, it's a mouthful. But if you do get one, you have 2 weeks from the date they are registered to complete that. So it might just be a good idea if you know that you might have a student to get that out of the way. Every single person who administers an LPAC must be trained through that Moodle site. Every single person. Now, when it comes to the alternative summative LPAC, the person who's giving it should be the person that's most familiar with that child's communication style. That way they're able to accurately understand and represent that student's language. Can't I just keep those paper and pencil testing and all the DFAs on my desk? It's such a pain to lock them up every night. No, they're secure materials. They must be locked up and they must be kept secure. When you log into Tom's and you sign the waiver that says, I solemnly swear I'm up to no good, most of us just scroll to the bottom and go, yep. But within it, it outlines all of your security requirements. So if you read it, yes, you must lock everything up. Can I give my kids a sneak peek of the assessment? Actual question. What's the answer, friends? No, but you could use interim assessments. Very nice from the gallery. Well done, well done. So there are lots of other resources that you can use to help students understand and get a feel for what they're going to see. But no, you cannot provide a sneaky peeky. Do I actually have to read that DFA? The script is so dry. Can't I just paraphrase it? No, it is written in a manner that ensures equity for all students across the entire state of California. Therefore, it is important that you read it word for word. So please make sure you impress upon people. I walked into a room and they were like, well, actually what this means, it's like, oh, no, friend, read the script. What happens if there's a security incident? Ooh, the magical music just filled the room. Security incidents are to be taken seriously. I always would send an email to people telling them what I needed. if they had a security incident ahead of time, because sometimes they forget the details. You're going to need date. You're going to need time. You're going to need exactly which domain they were testing. You're going to need the names of all students involved. Do not throw SSID numbers along with names in an email. Those are secure, but you could do one or the other. It's important that you have all of this information because whoever's doing that stairs case needs all of those details. If you have a breach, a security breach or a safety breach, somebody took a picture of the screen with their phone, that needs to be reported immediately. Other cases definitely need to be reported as soon as possible, no later than the end of the day. The earlier you can get to it, the quicker it can get resolved. Yes, Bob, can you go on mic so people? Oh, okay, but we want to make sure the Zoom, if everyone doesn't know, Bob Martin is an amazing resource and he's retired and he's given us his amazing presence today. Bob, please enlighten us.
Well, actually, I'm working for Burbank, so I'm not just bored and coming to a meeting.
I didn't say any of those things.
With the security incidences, when you're putting your notes together, if you add all the details on what you did to clean it up,
Yes.
everything you did, whether, if it was a posting to a social media, that you ensured that the student took it down, that you looked at the phones, that you made sure all the by the way, make sure when you're looking at a phone that you're looking at the deleted files of the pictures as well as the pictures themselves to make sure they're all gone. Put all the notes of everything you did after the event, and it makes it a whole lot cleaner that nobody has to contact you for further information.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bob. And that goes for not just social media, but for any stairs case. Put in all of the steps you've taken. It leads to far less back and forth. Thank you, Bob. There is a new carrier. People have started to kind of freak out about this. We are using FedEx, not UPS. White truck, not brown truck. But that also means it's going to North Carolina instead of New Jersey. There's a couple other new things that I wanted to point out, that you will use the new returns portal rather than having a little slip inside the box for returns. So it's important to be aware of that, and you'll get packs of 5 instead of 10. So make sure you're thinking about that when you're doing your ordering. Supplemental testing ordering window has opened. It opened January 22nd. You can expect about a 2-week turnaround time. All the instructions, if you're not clear on how to do that, are in Tom's. All the links are in the slides. Reminder, we are required to have 100% of our students assessed for LPAC and summative LPAC. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Sarah. An update on initial LPAC and our progress towards students testing within the 30-day window. We, of course, know that we have 30 days from the date of enrollment for a student who has been determined eligible to test with initial LPAC to be tested with that assessment. If the student has not been assessed with the initial LPAC, you are to have the student enrolled in ELD services, English development services, despite the fact that they are not yet or may not be identified as an English learner. Last November, or this November, so a few months ago, we had within the 0 to 30 window, 1,082 students, and it looks like there has been, based on this data and in the interpretation of Tracy Albee, an influx of students who are eligible for who have a TBD, who are eligible for the initial LPAC, with 1,482 currently, as of yesterday's email, eligible for that test. That might have to do with just a regular level of influx in the holidays, or it may mean there is an actual influx. Is anybody experiencing influx in your school or your district? So not maybe one of you. So maybe a localized influx. It looks like there's good news on the out of compliance area. 30 plus days is not compliant, but there is a reduction in the number of students who haven't been tested within those 30 days. So that's good work on and everybody's part. These are statewide numbers rather than LA County only. We do have access to LA County level information as well if you'd like to see something for your own district. However, you have those within your within TOMS. All right, looking at interim assessment and our mid-year counts, this is intended to get you to jump on board the bus, join the celebration, give the students that preview that apparently is wanted in a appropriate and an ethical way. That interim assessment chance to practice with those accommodations, those designated supports, the chance to get in the system and know where they're at. That chance to see the type of thing that that students are expected to do for a teacher or for a student themselves. There is good news on the interim assessment counts. Right around this time last year, similar data showed lower numbers, lower numbers. So an increase for this year of Smarter Balance ELA, increase for Smarter Balance Math, increase for science tests, and an increase for LPAC as well. So all the interims, everybody's jumping on board that train. And I recommend doing it as well. Great for your students, great for your teachers, great for your accommodations, designated supports, and the usability of for students on those assessments at the end of the year, and great instructionally as a tool for formative assessment. In terms of a tool for formative assessment, in terms of a tool for using performance tasks, we want to reintroduce and reiterate. If you have been to some of the past DAAN meetings, the director of this program has presented this to you, Deborah Atwell. Deborah Atwell's at a meeting, organizing meeting for that today. But over the past month, the official launch has occurred for the ATLAS program. The ATLAS program is the Authentic Task for Learning and Assessment in Science program. That is a task bank. It's a task bank that looks like this on the website. There's a link in the Canvas page, and we'll have a chance to get in there and browse around in a few slides. This is what it's going to look like. Atlas-ngss.com is the website. And we'll talk a little bit about the background of it and then get a chance to browse in the system. So this is a diagram that came from the Assessment Innovations concept paper, and that is the document that went to the State Board of Education that established this task bank, and also research on potential direction for science assessment in the future. There are two separate projects. One is the Atlas Task Bank, and one is a separate project for researching future growth for the assessment itself. The reason I dropped Atlas in right after interim assessments is functionally it is as a task similar to an interim assessment. So if you look at a bank of assessment items or task items, you might look at performance tasks within the interim assessments, or performance tasks within the practice and training tests. This is not within that bank because it's not attached to a currently active format of the science assessment. It's a compilation of resources that have been developed and have been developed since I believe 2018. They're under Los Angeles County Office of Education as the manager of a program that is has some technology partners, and all of the tasks were developed over the course of, these are the technology partners, Education First and Digital Promise, as well as that partnership with the NGSS Collaborative and CDE. All the tasks were developed with teachers across the state of California, looking to teachers who are from rural districts, are from urban districts. They also include tasks that were developed across the U.S. So the task banks are not exclusive to California. One of the options within the task banks is to the NGSS Atlas Task Bank is to create a login. Within that login, you can choose to repost a task with your local modifications. So let's say you've got a task that came from Seattle with weather data that was developed with data from Seattle, but obviously has data that could match your local situation, your circumstances here in Los Angeles County, or even as local as your individual school. That task, your modification of it, can be reposted in for reuse in LA County or reuse across the state of California, and become an additional resource, almost like a PLC kind of aspect. Part of the community embedded into it has that ability to review, post exemplars of student work, post modifications, community aspect on top of the tasks themselves that have been vetted and built through some really reputable sources. So all of that, all the community aspects are an optional add-on that you choose as a user to add on to your experience by creating a login, but you have access to the whole bank without having to log in, unlike Tools for Teachers or unlike a interim assessment bank. You have full access without a login. There's a lot of enthusiasm from the classroom about this task bank. Here's a few quotes from actual users. They've done some extensive testing and implementation with local LEAs. Some of those LEAs were at the launch event yesterday. We saw a launch at the State Board of Education as well here in January, and the official launch date of the task bank where it became live was January 1st, I believe. All right, this is a chance to get hands-on. So if you have a laptop in front of you and you're not doing email, grab a browser and navigate to NGSS-atlas.com. This is what you're going to see. First thing you're going to do is describe a task you're looking for. Imagine that you're a teacher again, and or for the first time, and describe a task you might want to see. My first thing I typed in happened to be a task that I used in the desert. There was a city program where you could get a $500 to xeriscape your front yard and get rid of your grass. So I had students design a xeriscape front yard, either for their own front yard or for a hypothetical front yard, and I found nothing. So you might not find what you're looking for, but if you put in enough words, you might find something very related. And part of that lesson was attached to mutualism standards and standards where we looked at how plants and butterflies interact, and plants and birds interact. And there was similar tasks to that piece of it. So I imagine if I were using that back in the day, it would be a chance to add my modifications on top of that mutualism, or even submit. There's going to be another submission period here coming up. for additional tasks into the bank, and it will be ever growing, hopefully. All right, once you've searched, take a moment to refine that search, filter that search. A lot of the tasks that you see on the screen are tasks that were developed within Los Angeles County itself, but you have tasks that have been developed, as I mentioned, across the state and across the country. Once you get to those tiles, click on one of the tiles, pull up one task and see what it looks like. And this will be the task page that are going to include information about each task, feedback from teachers. You'll notice that a lot of the community aspects are a framework and not currently rated or not currently annotated, and that's your job or your teacher's job, is to get in there and get that that noted. We know how valuable that is when we're looking for a restaurant. We know how valuable that is when we're working with material. We know how valuable that PLC is when we're working with our fellow teachers. Seeing this as a community across California for building better lessons in science that look more like science, assessment in science that looks more like science. Yeah, it's a value to everybody. All right. All of these components where it's sharing experiences with tasks, like I mentioned, require a login and account. I recommend taking a moment to create that account, create that login, and share a task with a colleague. So once you've logged in, I believe you can share a task with a colleague, pull up an email of a science teacher you know, and share. And then also it gives you the opportunity to create collections and groups of tasks. So another tool that might be usable with groups of teachers, that PLC aspect at a local level. And of course, there's resources attached, just like you might see resources explaining how it works, how the whole. So some more comments on the Atlas Bank in terms of what it looks like for teachers, how it's working for them. But I want to give you a few minutes to navigate around and get some of those things done. All right, so we're almost at time for this part of our meeting. So we're going to wrap this up, get a chance to, if you didn't get a chance to see everything you wanted to see, take that back to your district with you. Some of the future avenues for this are, I mentioned some of them, enhancements to the technical ability to engage socially, expansion of tasks and collections. That's something they're having an open call for as well. Instructional strategies and implementation guidance. So in terms of some of the things that have been talked about, I think when you look in at tools for teachers, there's components that address ELD needs and goals. There's components that address formative assessment embedded into broader tasks, this type of thing. Development of task resources in connection to the statewide assessment system. That's that originating document that PTEL's grant and the innovations concept paper. Any questions?
So the question is, with Atlas, are they customizable, including for students who take the CAA? Do you want me?
Yeah, go ahead.
They're downloadable tasks and they are PDF. However, they are editable. They are not assessments, and they are not intended to be assessments. They're intended to be inquiry-based instruction that the teacher can integrate at any point to gather information about students' thinking. So yes, editable, that's a word I'm going with, and customizable to fit the needs of the classroom and the teacher. Of course.
All right. With that, before you leave, give us feedback on today's meeting. So this is a slide that Evan so definitely slid in at the end of his presentation. It's just here again. If you already gave assessment that 5, that top score, you're good. But go ahead and be sure to do that. This is, in fact, for the online part of our meeting. If you are here in person, we want you to stay. We'd like you to stay with us for our in-person extension and elaboration and the chance to, I know when I was doing DAAN as a member, this was the most valuable thing, is being in the room and having somebody in the next seat next to me tell me that there was a grant that I didn't know existed, or they had a Excel spreadsheet template that I could use to dump my data into and give out to my principals. Really valuable being in person. So if you're not in person, if you're online, you're missing out. So I recommend getting the next in-person version of the hybrid. I also know how hard it is to drive. My district was literally next door, and it took me an hour to drive to Downey. So understood, but be here in person. It's worth it. Before we go, I want to highlight some assessment professional learning that we have coming up. Shameless plug. We've got Wednesdays at 1 coming up. This is today. It's Wednesday today, isn't it? When you lock yourself into a name of a meeting that has the date in it, or the day in it, you're kind of locked into that day and time, aren't you? Wednesdays at 1 is starting up. Is that next week, or is that the week? February 11th. Okay, a couple weeks after the start of LPAC assessment window, we'll start back up for Wednesdays at 1. Get together every week during the testing window through May 27th. So whole testing window, it looks like, for at least for LPAC. We've got Mic Drop Math with some partners from an LEA on March 5th. We've got a Level Up Your Classroom on Smartest Tools for Teachers resources, and Smarter Balanced Content Explorer upcoming on April 13th. So you're welcome to all and any of those, and please invite your TOSAs, invite your program specialists, invite your teachers to the teacher oriented ones as well. So we welcome you to browse those offerings and more. And there's a link to that at the bottom. It's kind of hard to see with this in person, but it's in that presentation. With that, I think I turned off the.
I'm just going to speak from the back of the room. Just one clarification and I put this in the webinar or in our chat, but if you're in the room, the CDE growth webinar, they had the time listed in the dashboard spotlight that went out last week as 10 a.m. But when you register, it says 11 a.m. So my recommendation is register, and if it's at 10 a.m., they'll clarify. But yeah, you may see some conflicting information. We had it listed as 10 a.m. because that came out last week there you go. So yeah, so it may be at 11 a.m. It's basically next Monday. So it's coming up quickly, but register now and you'll get, and I don't know if they're going to record that. I think not. They have a tendency not to record things because of the time it takes to convert them for things. So register so you can get the latest updates. And that's it. Now can you zoom back forward to the disclosing out? I'm just going to make one last pitch before we leave. So thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody who's in the room, and we do hope you'll stay with us. Thanks to the DAAN team here at LACOE. But we just want to note what we like about the in-person meetings. If you're not here, here's what you're missing, right? Some hands-on learning. We're going to be talking about some very specific things related to making sure you maximize your participation rate, the peer collaboration. And this is where we really lean into what people are doing, what kind of strategies, and if you're new especially, this may be of real value to you. Like mentioned, we've got Bob Martin here, so we have some people in the room who have some exceptional experience But it does lead to some deeper discussion, the opportunity to network. So when you leave here, you'll have somebody else you can pick up the phone and call. And also it's this dedicated focus time. We know you're busy, but I know what it's like when I'm trying to listen to a webinar and then I get an email and then I get distracted. Then I miss 5 minutes. If you come here, you can still bring your email, but it's a lot easier to tune in and stay with us in person. So encourage you to come. We have a full room this time, so that's always nice. And so with that, we're going to stop the Zoom presentation part of this session, and then we're going to give us 5 minutes. We'll take a 5-minute break. We need to switch our presentations. No, actually, we don't need to switch presentation. We're going to take another 5-minute break while we get ready, and then we'll come back together and do our extension activity. And if you have to leave, we understand that too. But thank you for being here today, and thank you for joining us online.